Okay, cool. Well, welcome everybody to episode number 1 of Invent FM. It is an idea that's been cooking for a while, and I am super excited to have Spencer Wright agree to be my guinea pig in this experiment, and help me figure out what Invent FM is and should be. I know we're going to be learning a lot along the way. So Spencer is an inspiration to me as both an inventor and what I'd call community builder, and maybe you have different terms you like to self-identify with. But Spencer, would you be willing to just give us a quick intro into your world and your role at the Prepared specifically?
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me, Raymond. Great to be here. Um, so my job now is I write a newsletter, um, and that's it. I mean, it's funny because I started this newsletter 7 years ago. It's kind of about manufacturing and engineering and that kind of thing. It was never intended to be really anything at all. But about 9 months ago, it became officially my full-time job. Um, Now there is some. I mean, it's interesting. You referred to me as a community builder, which um, I even more kind of didn't intend to happen. Yeah, I didn't mean to write a newsletter for a living. I definitely didn't mean to build a community for a living. It ends up that the community aspects of this newsletter, which is a weird phrase to, to even say, the community aspects end up being a very large part of my day-to-day kind of existence. Um, and I guess it'd probably be useful to kind of say what that is. I mean, the the community side of the prepared is um, a group of people who are kind of interested in the kinds of things the newsletter has traditionally covered, which is kind of manufacturing, engineering, hardware, product development, um, and want a place to kind of socialize digitally about those things. Um, so its primary venue is a Slack instance, where we all kind of hang out and you know, talk about, I don't know, the Apple event or the what's happening in the subways or last week there was this train that came off the tracks and ended up being caught by a piece of sculpture. And we just kind of like discuss these aspects of the world and kind of how we all fit into it. And somehow that's my job.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I was trying to think of a way to describe the Prepared, and I've been a reader for a few years now, and we've we use the job board regularly at Polyspectra. um, but I think the best description I could come up with was it's like the New Yorker for manufacturing.
I'll take it, man. Yeah, I'll totally accept that compliment.
That's awesome. So for those of you who want to subscribe to the New Yorker for manufacturing, it's free, and you can subscribe at theprepared.org. But I guess actually the one thing, this is maybe going to take us in an unfocused direction, but the one thing I realized maybe you need, Spencer, we could collaborate on this if you want, is you need cartoons. If you're
Yeah,
gonna do.
right, right. Yeah. Yeah, God, what's the caption contest for the prepared? That's actually, there might be some meat there. Who knows?
Okay, well, let's keep brainstorming for that. Um, so obviously, manufacturing is uh it's a niche. It's a niche that we care a lot about. And I think in many ways is sort of underrepresented by uh, a lot of, the value or the in kind of what people see as innovation in, let's say, the last 20 years being mostly digital and not necessarily understanding the like physical infrastructure. I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you uh, what's sort of the flag that you wave at the prepared that says, hey, we're about this and we're not about this, and how do you think about that intersection between the physical world and the digital? Because it is a digital newsletter, but it's
It
it's
is.
about trains falling off the tracks.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a while where I described it as it's about good work in the real world or something like that. And I think the intention of that was to kind of try to encourage people to work on stuff that matters. Um, and to me, a lot of the things that matter are in the physical world. Um, Whether or not they involve software or are venture backed, I kind of don't even care that much,
Yeah.
as long as they're kind of at least ostensibly aimed towards progress and in some measure, right? Um, but you know, I think that another lens that I like to look at the world through is just like, what would this kind of off kilter and like ostensibly dull thing look like if you just got excited about it? Um, and so I think that you and I met over a shared interest in 3D printing and additive manufacturing. I think that we
Yeah.
originally met probably when I was writing about metal 3D printing,
Yeah.
um, which is a very cool set of technologies. I think you can do some really amazing things by taking powder and hitting it with an energy source and making it into a solid object. Um, but it's also, you know, I think the main reason that I became interested in it is because there's a lot of hype around it, right? And what I kind of realized after working with it for a couple of years, not that it's not worth the hype, because in a lot of ways it is. I mean, in some ways it wasn't a couple of years ago, but in a lot of ways it is, and I bet on metal 3D printing in the future. Um, but it's also cool is like casting, right? Like casting is a really cool technology, and most people when they think about casting, all they can really think about is like cast iron pans. Um, and it turns out that like precision casting, it like makes the world go round. Like you fly on a jet, there are these like incredibly precise cast parts that make jet engines so much more powerful and efficient. And that's awesome. And I think that if you're willing to get excited about metal 3D printing, you should also be really excited about precision casting as well. And by that same token, like if you're interested in, I don't know, Apple and 5 nanometer silicon lines and or whatever, Snapchat or TikTok or anything, it's worth it to also spend some time getting excited about trains and tunneling technology as well. Does that resonate to you? I mean, you're a reader of this thing, right?
I am a reader, and I'm also I'm totally on board with you on multiple levels. One, uh, as a professional who's kind of committed my career thus far since graduating from grad school to effectively closing the digital to physical divide, right? Like, what is 3D printing, if not just a means of rendering a digital idea in the real world, right? And it's not the only
Right.
way to do that, but then I guess the thing I also want to share that I really resonate with, and it's something that I've really struggled with as a founder, to say, who are we, what is Polyspectra, what do we stand for, what don't we, is around the hype of 3D printing, and that most of sort of what you would be led to believe by the press releases, like, is not true. And my joke in this space is, um uh it's the vaporware of vaporware, right? Like, if you want to make vaporware, you use 3D printing to print the prototype that doesn't really exist and take some nice shots. And so then it's like, well, of course, the people building the tools to do that are really good at doing that. And it's
Right.
not to say that there isn't real stuff. And I'm totally with you. I didn't know very much about metal. It's not what we work on, but I didn't know very much about it until a couple of years ago. And then when I started digging into it, I realized, wow, metal 3D printing it's like a miracle. Like, it's a
Hmm.
miracle that it works at all. Once you start to think about them, you're basically like have a welding torch that you're trying to precisely control and not spit and bubble and explode. And it's really, yeah. um Sorry, now we're nerding out on the metal piece. um I Yeah, I'm totally with you on both of those. um maybe to shift, I have a question that I intend to ask everybody that comes on the show. And so you can be the first to try to answer the riddle. And in some ways, it's the question that I'm trying to figure out for myself by doing this show. But I'm very curious, Spencer. What does invention mean to you?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think that the aspect, uh, the the thing that invention kind of hinges on is value creation, um, and specifically value creation for others. And I think that I would want to imply that by inventing something, you end up creating more value for others than you even do for yourself. Um, and I think that maybe this is maybe tangentially related, but I see all these studies about like technological progress, and
Mhm.
um, uh, there's actually a great study about um, the effect, the kind of economic impact of racism in the United States. Um, and they use basically some researchers wanted to decide or learn um, how much did like Jim Crow affect Black people in the United States,
Mhm.
and they did. I think they did a ton of work to figure this out, um, and I think their conclusion is totally right and correct, which is that it turns out that racism was terrible for Black people in the United States. And the way they measured that was by measuring patent filings, right? They say if a person files a patent, that marks some amount of progress, right? And sure enough, when you look in the patent records in the United States and um, they used methods to disaggregate Black inventors from everybody else, mostly white people, right? Um, and you realize that the year of like peak activity for Black inventors was like it may have been like the early 1900s, right? And so you can kind of see like, all right, there's all this activity lost since then. Um, and I totally agree with the conclusions of this paper. I'm not, I haven't looked at the original evidence or anything like that, but it
You
makes
haven't
complete sense to me.
recalculated their p values for them?
No, no, I have not. No, no, no. But the thing about it that did strike me was I I actually don't necessarily agree that a patent indicates any value creation, right? Like a patent indicates that somebody wanted recognition that what they did was novel. But we all know there are patents that are actually not useful at all, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And
and we also know that in some cases, I mean, especially in software patents, there are a lot of patents that are actually not novel, really, right? This is like kind of how patent trolls work, right? Um, and I think to me, like having a patent with your name on it is an incredibly cool idea. I love that idea. I don't have any of them. Um, that doesn't mean though that I haven't created value. And to me, the idea of like creating value and like bringing something to the world that didn't exist before, or bringing it in a way that allows it to really flourish, is really important and distinct from patent activity in particular, right?
mhm. Do you have a sense of obviously any metric can be gamed, but do you have a sense of if you were gonna think? So I love the idea of invention um, as a sort of proxy of, let's say, opportunity, or like maybe more, I don't know, maybe it's too intellectual opportunity, or like it does, embedded in it is access to education, all of these things, which is why I think it's relevant to the this study of systemic racism and policies. And at the same time, I totally agree with you. They're counting patents. If you have enough money, it's very easy to have 500 patents,
Right.
and it's very hard to have one that actually represents a novel idea.
Right. Yeah, I
um,
mean,
yeah,
commercializing something is every bit as important
right.
as like uh as coming up with a novel idea, right? And I think
Hmm.
that like, I mean, maybe this is a good question. I mean, like, and to challenge my own definition earlier, um, you know, uh, having invented something, does that mean that it must have been commercialized, right? I mean, because if I say that invention is contingent upon value creation, if
Right.
you make a new thing that's not actually that never comes to commercial success. Now maybe if we use commercial loosely, it doesn't mean that your
Hmm.
company does really well, but like the thing goes into the world and is used, right? Does that mean that you've invented it, right? If it never gets kind of commercialized, has it actually been invented in the first place?
Right.
There's some kind of epistemic questions here that I'm not totally prepared to answer on
Yeah.
on tape, maybe, but yeah.
No, that's, yeah, and maybe we don't need to get too heady or philosophical with it. Actually, that this reminds me that something I really wanted to ask you more about, and I was in doing my homework for this. I was, kind of re-familiarizing. I read the prepared regularly, but then I was looking at the website, and one of the things that I really appreciated and that I want to find out more about is um, yours sort of, I don't know if policy is the right word, but your intention and commitment to inclusivity and diversity um, in the prepared and that community. Could you speak a little bit more to how you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, I think that the first step. So I think what you probably found was that there's an inclusivity page on the
Yeah.
website, um, which says a couple things. And God, I haven't looked at it in probably a
Yeah, I
month or
don't mean
two.
to pop
So
quiz you,
no,
but
no, 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 not at all, not at all. And it says a couple of things. One of which is that like I I want to make an effort to just like cover people that are not white dudes like myself, right? Like
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
that's important to me, and um, just being conscious of it in the first place is kind of my first step. And I think that in my own work, so there are limited measures of demographic information available to an email newsletter writer like myself.
Yeah.
Basically, what I have from readers is their email address. Now there are methods of kind of figuring out who people are, what the demographics are from those email addresses, but they're mushy, right? Um, there are plenty of services that'll do like a reverse lookup to your LinkedIn profile or your Facebook profile or something like that. But they have very limited success rates, and the results they give you are something you want to kind of squint at a little bit, and not take as hard truth. Having said that, um, I have tracked demographics, specifically gender, among subscribers for, I don't know, 3 years, something like that. Um, yeah, probably would have been 3 years, 3.5 years ago that I started doing that, kind of in earnest, and have, uh, I mean, just like being aware of that from the beginning and having like some benchmark for yourself of kind of the population that you're serving, and whether that population is skewing one direction or other, which, like, full transparency, so the preparedness readership is whatever, 82% male or something like that, right? Like, and like, that's, like, on the one hand, like, bad. On the other hand, it's a little bit better than college graduation rates from engineering schools, right? So,
Okay.
um, so I'm doing marginally better than the education system if we trust my numbers to begin with, which
Right.
I kind of do. Um, uh, the I will say, I mean, the kind of, so the prepared is a newsletter, but then it has this community as well, which is, members, of a couple different varieties, and within our Slack instance there is a lot of discussion of these topics, which ends up then making its way into the newsletter, because ultimately I'm often not the right person to kind of find or develop a perspective on these matters,
Mm-hmm.
and so having a community that is kind of intentionally diverse, which the Slack instance is actually a little bit more diverse than the general readership,
Yeah.
because of a couple different policies we've set up there, um, and having like dedicated places to talk about these issues and trying to encourage people, directly inviting people to share rather than waiting for them to speak up themselves, and then trying to bring that into the newsletter whenever it's possible, or kind of, or appropriate, let's say, is something that I try and make a good effort towards. Um, you know, I think that if I were to grade myself on my, like progress against my inclusivity policy, I would definitely not give myself an A. Um, and I think that, like, it's really different. I mean, I'm not. It's a one person business, right?
Right.
The repair it is, and so, like, finding ways to feel fully committed to something while, like running around with your head cut off most of the time, like, is
Yeah.
a real kind of, I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, and uh but just putting it down in writing that is something I care about has, it's paid off so many ways. It just makes
Right.
people feel like, I mean, it makes people feel like you give a shit, right?
Yeah.
Which is like the most, like, it's the most basic commitment you can make.
Right.
Um, the one
Yeah,
other
and
thing
I
I will
like,
say,
sorry, I
oh,
just
go,
want to
go,
say I
go ahead.
really like that I think just something as simple as, hey, this is something that we talk about, and this is, something that's okay to be discussed. In my experience, and again, I'm not an expert in this world, and it, I think, can have a big uh, impact on the, let's say, at the very least, the inclusivity piece of, like, people feeling welcome. So actually, can I ask you a question of your, uh, so your sort of, what would an A look like for someone, not, I mean, or someone, a parallel Spencer, or a
Right.
parallel prepared? I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's a good question. Like, what, or or what haven't I done? Um, I think, there have been a number of ideas suggested to me, or I've had a conversation with a bunch of people who I trust on the subjects. And I would say like the more ambitious ones involve, setting up some kind of, residency program. So hard to tell in the video, but I'm actually in a workshop. We'll maybe see it in a couple of minutes.
Oh yeah,
Um,
we're about to have the big reveal.
right, right. So I have this light industrial space in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and I have kind of discussed with a couple of people the idea of like setting up a residency here for folks who come from less privileged backgrounds than myself.
Hmm.
Not exactly sure how that would be framed precisely, um, but um, the idea being basically like bring people in and give them access to a workshop and some kind of resources, and because like I pay for this shop, like I grew up in a family where like we had tools and like had some education on how to use them and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
And so providing that to somebody else is something that I would like to do. Now, unfortunately, like these discussions were all like late 2019, and like the world hasn't been super friendly to like congregating and teaching people
Yeah,
stuff in a shared physical space over the past 9 months.
of
Um,
course.
but uh, but I still I have to give myself demerits for not having accomplished that um, uh, in some capacity since then.
Okay.
Um,
So hey, actually, I want
yeah,
to I want to flip it because I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like
yeah,
you're unfairly beating yourself up about something, and I just want to acknowledge like you're a effectively solopreneur doing this amazing thing, building this awesome community. So actually, here's the way I want to flip it, which is, uh, is there like, is there an ask of the millions of people who are going to be watching this, that you might have, that do care about diversity, do care about inclusivity, do think that this residency program would be like they'd want to see something like that? I'm curious, like, is there an ask of the audience, or you just need a sponsor for that, because it really is about prioritizing, or what would help you kind of like make that real?
yeah. Basically, yes, yeah. Basically, I need a sponsor to help do this, right?
Okay.
I mean, they're like it's kind of a fixed resource. It's real estate, right?
Yep.
And I'm willing to put forward some of that resource, but having another kind of corporate sponsor to encourage that would absolutely go a long way, for sure.
Okay.
Um,
Well, we'll
I think
we'll
that
make sure we put that in the show notes.
awesome. Yeah, yeah. I think that the other thing that I like would very much appreciate, or appreciate just as much, would be like I want to follow more people who are doing cool stuff and are like badass engineers and who don't look like me, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I will note there's a awesome website called restofworld.org. They came on my radar a couple of months ago. They're a news outlet, a journalism outlet that writes about. I mean, it's I think it's meant to be kind of tongue in cheek. They write about the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
And they do a really good job. That they have like they had a great piece about TSMC a couple months ago. They have something about Ant Financial recently, or I guess it's called Ant Group or something like that. Whatever Jack Ma rebranded it to. Um, and knowing more of those kinds of resources makes my life, distributing that to my audience easier. And so yeah, like if you can like put in the
People
comments or whatever it
put
is,
in the
right?
comments. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Once we put this, I think one of the live comments that we got was the Lamelson Foundation,
Oh yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
I think is behind the like the I think they have their own prize at MIT for it. You don't have you have to have some connection to MIT, but the for energy innovation, and sure there's lots of groups that care about this kind of thing from a philanthropic perspective. So
Yeah.
yeah, if folks have thoughts on that, we would appreciate it, and I'll work with my team to make sure Spencer sees all the suggestions. So hey, I think this might, since you hinted that there's a surprise reveal, you are in a box that is inside another box. Maybe now I would love to to the extent that you're willing, have the audience see like a quick tour of the facility, and then maybe we could learn a little bit about your invention, the public radio, which I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so like you said, to cue it up, I mean, this we're in a recording booth, obviously, right here, which is part of the larger workshop that the Prepared runs, right? And so we've been here for about 2 years now, and about 2,000 square feet in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn. And there's a range of people who work out of here. I think that there's only one other person here right now. I am in a mask up, just FYI. But the kind of stuff that's being worked on here is mostly kind of electronics and electronics adjacent, kind of small format, consumer hardware-ish, which my product public radio also falls into as well. So yeah, let me give you a tour.
Awesome.
And pardon the logistics here for a second here.
No, as I was joking with you beforehand, the masking up is a sign of leadership.
Least you can do, right? Yeah.
So we'll put up with any acoustic issues to appreciate your civic responsibility.
Cool. So yeah, this is the shop. In true kind of industrial fashion, the recording booth that I was in is actually an 80/20 frame that is suspended from anchor bolts in the ceiling. I have these acoustic blankets.
So that deadens the noise of the coffee grinder. So
exactly, yeah. It's actually a pretty effective sound booth for something that we could, in theory, take down and move to a different location in the shop. So yeah, we have a pretty large general kind of shop area, shared area. And here, I'll walk over this direction. I have my desk over here, big shared workshop on this side. I've been spending a lot of my time recently messing with a 1940s drill press, which has been a very interesting and kind of frustrating project.
wow.
And then the public radio is over here. So actually, let me do something like this. So public radio is a single channel FM radio that's housed in a mason jar. So it's an FM radio receiver, runs off 2 AA batteries, and it's housed in this little squat mason jar that we get from the Ball Corporation. It has a retractable antenna, and
wow.
I'm not sure if these batteries are live or dead, but we'll see.
Like genre markers.
It
just didn't make any sense. And
so it tunes to one single station, which is super weird, until you realize that, like, if you're going to search for music or news, you're probably going to do it with your phone, not your radio.
Right.
But plenty of people still do have FM radios and listen to like an NPR station, or I have one at home that's tuned Hot 97 for hip hop in New York. And it's a weird juxtaposition because, like, it's a very like homespun aesthetic, right? But it ends up being a pretty advanced fulfillment operation that happens right here. So we receive printed circuit boards from our PCBA shop in Massachusetts. It's called Worthington Assembly. It's made from parts from around the world. The speaker being kind of the largest one, which we source from Dongguan, but assembled in Massachusetts, and we receive it here unprogrammed, so there's no firmware on this. And then through a bunch of kind of software magic, we receive orders from a couple different places. We do a lot of radio station orders, right? So like WNYC, WBEZ, big radio stations that you probably heard of. I don't have any right here, but we take our lid and we do some laser marking on it and then assemble radios and tune them to that station's frequency, and then they give them out as like fund drive gifts.
Okay.
We also get retail orders via a CSV file every night from our wholesaler, from our retailer, which is called Uncommon Goods. And then we have our own website that gets normal retail orders that we retrieve via the Squarespace API. And then we have this whole system for tuning them and boxing them up in a way that basically guarantees that the radios work, which is kind of magical, honestly, because we can shift to, so for instance, in the US, the FM frequency range goes from 87.9 to 107.9, I believe. But in Japan, the FM frequency range is in the 70 megahertz range. So it's like, and in Europe, you can have, in the US, you only have odd frequencies. In Europe, you can have even frequencies as well. So different regions of the world manage the FM spectrum differently.
Wow.
And using our system, we actually play a test tone over that frequency to make sure that every person gets the right radio and it actually plays audio as well. Is it worth me tuning a radio? Is that interesting? I don't even know.
I think so. I think it would be exciting.
All right, cool. Let's see it. Yeah.
Let's do the whole thing. I love, this is like a different way of thinking about mass customization, or
Yeah. The funny thing is, so it's totally a mass customized product, and I'm super proud of the fulfillment operation that we built for it. And as a result of building this, my belief that mass customization is going to happen has plummeted just because it's like so much work. But basically, so we use a piece of software called Tulip to manage the fulfillment process. So I have this laptop here that is showing me work instructions and telling me what to do. It's basically like a slideshow that advances to the next slide every time I do something. The first thing it does is print out a shipping label, which I scan. That automatically looks up the order in our database, which is a custom app that's written in Heroku. It also prints a shipping label in this case. I then grab a partially assembled radio. So again, this has no firmware on it, but it's mechanically sound. I scan that to bring its serial number into the app. It also checks to see if the serial number has any issues associated with it or anything like that.
So that would prevent if there was some known QC issue upstream, it would say stop. Do not.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do a full functional test in every single radio and you'll see that in a minute. But we do have failures every once in a while.
Yeah.
And when those happen, that the serial number is blacklisted or banned, I guess is the better term. And if you then scan that banned serial number in again, then it will it'll fail here, right? Because I read in the shipping label, the Tulip app now knows the frequency that it's going to turn to. And so that actually prints out here on the shipping this pack list as well. And now I just, I have this tuning jig here. I hold the radio down on the tuning jig, I press a foot pedal, and it will, it's a little hard to hear. So this here is actually an FM, it's a whip, a wire coming off a Raspberry Pi, and we actually transmit a test tone over the frequency that we tune the radio to. And so you can actually hear,
Okay.
you can hear a test tone being transmitted over an FM antenna, being received by the radio, and being played through the speaker. So basically, we
Cool.
guarantee that, you know, even if you live in
So
Japan or whatever,
you didn't need to fly it to Japan to check that it'll tune in.
precisely. Yeah. Can you imagine, right? And then I advance, and I can put the radio in the box. And then we have a bunch of like sanity checks. So basically, you put the whole thing together, and you close it up. And at the very end, you have to rescan a couple of barcodes that effectively ensure that you've put the right radio in the right box. Because, you know, even though you tuned this one to the right frequency, if you mailed it to somebody else that it was not intended for, that would obviously be bad. You know, so and so I scan the shipping label one more time, and that then does a couple of things. It marks the order as complete in our database, and it also sends off an email to our retail customers saying your order's on its way, here's its shipping number, and so on and so forth. And then it marks that radio as being associated with a shipment, so that you can't then pull it off the shelf. If it were to be like left around the shop, you could pull it off the shelf and you'd scan it again. It would tell you this is already boxed, and so on and so forth.
Got it. I
and
couldn't help but notice there was a picture of a baby that popped up. Was that the customer or?
So yeah,
That's the success screen.
It's the success screen. There's a success kid, the little kid doing that.
Oh,
you know?
that's awesome. All right.
Yeah. So so we use Tulip for all this, which is amazing. Tulip is kind of an amazing piece of software. I also use it in the shop. We have a key card entry system that I built using Tulip for our front door.
Oh wow.
And a couple of additional things. It's basically like it allows you to make apps for manufacturing, and so on the back end, when I make this app, it looks like a Google Sheets or Google Slides, where it looks like a slide presentation. You can move things around and drop an image in there, or drop a button in there.
Mm-hmm.
But then everything is linked together, because, you know, a slideshow just goes from one slide to the next. But with this, if you click on a button, there's a decision tree, right? And it can do different things. It can also interact with like kind of any web API. And we then have integrated it with our own custom inventory app that then does a bunch of additional stuff as well. Syncs it up to the printers, so on and so forth. And so when we created the actual slides for it 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was ago now, it's funny, those things where you you prototype something and you're like, I need to fill up space here. Yeah. So I'm just gonna put something ridiculous that I like, because I'm like, you're debugging it and you're like, if I see a cat, while I'm debugging, will remember that cat means bad or something weird.
Okay.
And then it just stays there for 5 years. And if anybody drops it and messes with this, it looks like completely bizarre.
That's funny.
But yeah.
Well, I appreciate you letting us, see behind the scenes, and I'm glad that we got the success kid at the end.
Right.
It
would be really embarrassing if it failed. Yeah, exactly.
It means that we did it right. Hey, one thing I want to double click on, because I think it's cool. So one, I just love the like combo aesthetic of the of the kind of artisanal like aesthetic, but at the same time this super like high-end high tech, right? Like I love
Right.
that contrast. I'm curious, uh one of the things that I noticed when I was playing with my cousin's public radio was the mason jar. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it also serves as the resonant cavity for
Oh yeah.
the speaker. And I sort of realized that when I unscrewed it and pulled it off, it sounded terrible. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
when you
Totally.
put it, so I'd love to just hear a little bit about like the maybe, you talk through a lot of the electronic stuff, but I, as kind of, musician and curious about that, I'd love to hear a little bit about the acoustic engineering considerations.
Yeah. So public radio started in 2014, I think, or so. Um, I did most of the mechanical design and then the kind of manufacturing engineering, and then my good friend Zach, who is a musician and an audio engineer, did the electronics and the kind of acoustic design as well.
Cool.
Well, I'm simplifying this greatly. Like there's a lot of crossover there, obviously, but
Right.
and basically we had bought a bunch of speakers from some DigiKey or something like that, and you get them and try to test them and like hold some things constant, and you realize like, yeah, they sound terrible when they're just like in the air because they need some resonating body,
Yep.
because there's just moving air back and forth, right? And so we just like grabbed a mason jar because what we had, we were like doing it in my kitchen, grabbed the mason jar, took a piece of cardboard, cut a hole in it, dropped the speaker and listen, and then swapped speakers in and out. And it was never meant to be a permanent thing. We were originally going to make some enclosure or something like that. But then we kind of realized like, these mason jars are like a buck a piece, just kind of expensive on the one hand, but also kind of cheap. And we can get them in any quantity we want to. And it's actually sized very appropriately for this speaker. And it
Yeah,
looks cool. It looks arguably cool, I guess. Not
I
for
think
some
it's
people, but
cool.
it is for others.
Yeah.
So yeah, we stuck with it, and it ended up kind of being like, it's a weird kind of gimmick in a way. I will say the past 9 months have really thrown a monkey wrench in this whole thing.
Uh-oh.
Um, Basically, mason jars are very difficult to get right now.
Are you serious?
Um, Totally serious. So
Wow.
we had been, so we had they're made by the Ball Corporation, or they have Ball on the side. Now, as it happens, Ball is actually like a chemicals company, right? Like they Ball, they're like a very high tech company that makes high value parts for the military and whatever, right?
Okay.
Um, they license the brand name out to Newell brands, so Newell Rubbermaid. They make the
Got it.
Tupperware and stuff like that. Um, and then they are then distributed by a company called Jarden, which is just some company that distributes stuff. And starting in like maybe May or something like that, our POs just got bounced back basically. And it turns out that everyone was home making sourdough. Well, they were also home canning tomatoes and pickles and things like that. And the most recent communication we've had from them, which was probably 2 months ago, so like September or so, was that they were going to be refusing all purchase orders from us until like March of 2021. So for like 9 months or a year, we are not able to purchase any more jars from this company, which boggles my mind. I don't
And
understand it at all.
and this is, yeah, and this is like a microcosm of the impact of coronavirus on a
Right.
global supply chain,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is really fascinating.
Yeah. It's kind of depressing for me. I mean, I like a couple of years ago, we thought about moving to a Chinese supplier. We even went as far as getting samples, I believe. but they weren't drop-in replacements. They were a little bit different. So we're going to have to like open our own mold for a piece of glass, which is something that I don't have any experience with.
Right.
And we decided like this is going to be a real pain. It's going to have a real large minimum order quantity. And, you know, as much as we've been frustrated with our current supplier because they have been just a difficult, just hard to place POs with,
Mm-hmm.
we would stick with them. And it's also nice to have like I like the ball logo, like it's really pretty, you know.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but I tell you, like it's discouraging now to look back and realize like, you know, we stuck with this American supplier and you know, I mean, luckily we have a lot of these jars in stock right now. And we were able to get some from a reseller, um, but eventually we're going to run out, and then we're just going to be kind of screwed, you know. And I think it speaks both to you know maybe poor risk mitigation on the part of our supplier on the part of this ball company, you know, their licensees,
Mm-hmm.
um, and of course partly it speaks to just like the general lack of preparedness in kind of our country, right? And you know,
Yeah.
I imagine that the you know that glass shop that we were looking at in like Ningbo or whatever it was, probably back up and running, and I bet they've got their COVID cases under lock right now, and it's
Right.
discouraging. It's yeah, it makes me kind of sad, honestly.
Yeah. I am not going to go down the rabbit hole of sharing our version of this, but I agree. It has been extremely discouraging and just kind of sad to see, um, you know, how is this place that has, to your original idea of like invention as value creation, right? Like the US has been just this powerhouse of ideas, and yet uh, we we have, you know, through labor arbitrage effectively got
Yeah,
lost all of our manufacturing capabilities. Um and COVID, I think, really highlighted that. And I think, to me, the most depressing piece of it is I still don't see anyone, um and again, some of this stuff I really can't talk about publicly, but let's say at the highest levels of procurement in our federal government, there's still not a lot of people, in my opinion, acting like adults and saying, how do we make sure this
yeah,
doesn't happen next time? And
yeah,
how do we, you know, everyone and their mom wanted to run a ventilator hackathon with a 20K prize, and what'd you get? A bunch of things in Tupperware. And
right,
you know, we helped a bunch of those people. Some of those ideas are really cool, and some of them actually are being made real. Guess what? Not in the United States. they're
right,
they're being manufactured, you know, in India. They're being manufactured in Guatemala. You know, and it's, so I think that to me is like it's I don't know, it's just depressing to see that loss of manufacturing capability and that loss of ability to have a society that can both invent and manufacture.
sustain. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's and sort of all in the name of like lowering costs because, you know, underage child labor somewhere else
right.
happens to be really cheap. I mean, anyways,
Yeah,
we don't have to get
yeah,
too depressing.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but no, I'm kind of with you on this. It's definitely a challenge, and a serious issue. And I think the ball jar thing is just such a tiny, uh, like I said, this beautiful kind of microcosm example for these much bigger problems. And I'll say I learned a lot more about how ventilators are manufactured than I ever thought I would, you know, in
right.
March and April.
Yeah,
And you know, that was I mean, they're okay, you know, I want everyone to buy the public radio who watches this, and in some ways, I want them to help you run out of mason jars. But with ventilators, it's no joke when you run out of
No.
components
Yeah.
for those, and their lives at stake. And yeah, it's serious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to transition the energy a little bit. I think we got real heavy, and it's important to talk about these things. I want to now, for the folks that are attending live, sort of open up the Q&A, and I guess I would personally prefer if everybody used the official Q&A button rather than the chat, because it's a little bit easier to manage. And then I as sort of some of those questions are coming in, I use it as an opportunity to ask Spencer a few more questions, and then we'll let him get on with his day. You game for that, Spencer?
That's good.
Okay. So, I love this one because this is related to it's personally related to my mission with Polyspectra, and I think it's related to a lot of stuff you've worked on with additive. So Alex asks, what are your thoughts on when to decide to invest in expensive capital tooling? I'll just stop it there. There's some context around that, but I think, when to invest in tooling versus, let's say, prototyping or going additive all the way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it depends on the context, right? If we're talking about like injection molding, or are we talking about is this? Yeah, I'm not seeing the Q&A question.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Is there additional context that's
The
relevant?
the context is inventors need to test ideas, but they can't access economies of scale. So how do you so maybe let's frame it like this. Let's leave it agnostic to, like, are you tooling up for molding, or are you tooling up, MIM or polymer, whatever, and let's make it more like how do you know when it's time to tool up, or like how do you know when the idea is ready to bite the bullet and tool up?
Yeah, I mean, when there's money on the table, basically, right? not much before that. Demand signal, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm lucky that I have only bought tooling under kind of two circumstances. One is when I just really want to, and it's a frivolous purchase, and it's something that I just for some reason it just scratches some itch. And the other is when the tooling is relatively cheap and the parts that are going to come out of it are really cheap, and I have orders to fulfill. And that latter case is it's a nice situation to be in, obviously, right? Like and there are folks who have designed more complicated hardware and had much more complicated tooling as a result, that I'm sure would have a harder time with it. The decisions that I've always had to make have been, it's been so clear, right? And I think that, like, our like lean startup, or that matter, lean manufacturing brain should come in and be like, no, you should only buy tooling when it's really clear that you have to, right? Because if you pre-optimize for it, then you're stuck with some hunk of metal. It doesn't give you any value. You can't offload it to somebody else for what you paid for it. So yeah, only do it when you actually need to do it, I guess.
Right. So actually, I have a question. So one of the things I've used as an example to like explain why what I think we're doing at Polyspectra is important is like, I'm like, why do people do Kickstarters?
Right.
And like, one is, okay, just like pre-sale and marketing, and that's smart.
Yeah.
But in the world that we're in, physical stuff, to pay for tooling.
Right.
And so I'm curious, like, how, I guess, do you I don't know, do you agree with that? Like, do you is that what I feel like you see a lot more of these through your community than I do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, I mean, that's how we used Kickstarter for public radio. I mean, we having said that, we didn't know what tooling we were going to need necessarily before we actually pressed go on the Kickstarter, right? Like we knew that there was a pretty decent chance that we could bring costs down by spending a little bit of money on tooling. And we had like, some parameters around that kind of figured out. But I think that we use Kickstarter mostly as a forcing function, honestly, right? It's like
To
if
hold
we get
yourself
enough,
to it.
yeah, it's like, like if we did it very explicit. We said, we ended up raising almost, like $87,000, something like that. So like a relatively small campaign still, but a decent amount of money, right?
Right.
And I think our funding goal was like 20 grand. And basically what we did was we said, if someone walked up to us and handed us a $20,000 check and said, you have to build whatever, I think it would have been 400 radios or something like that, would you do it? And the answer we both decided was, yeah, absolutely. Like if someone paid us 20 grand to build that many radios, we'd do it. It'd be fun. It'd be interesting, right? We'd learn a lot. We may or may not make any money off of it, but we'll get the value out that we need to.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was mostly a forcing function in that case. Now, we did then, since we overfunded, we ended up buying tooling and so on and so forth. And that was just like it was like I was saying earlier, like it was so clear that, like laser cutting stainless steel parts was just not going to scale. But like getting a progressive stamping die for whatever it was, $2,000 is like, write the check, man. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So yeah. Now I will say, like I said, the most of the tools that I've purchased have been just of the like purely scratching an itch variety, which that's cool too. And I think that there is something to be said for having a tool and then figuring out how to use it. But I've also been stuck with a bunch of big tools that I like really wanted and then realized that were totally impractical to own and really regretted it afterwards. So yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to end up with the buyer's remorse of your $100,000, I don't know, 3D microscope that you realize isn't.
Yeah.
I could have used the iPhone.
Yeah.
Awesome. I guess along those lines, or at least in this category of question, I'm curious. What advice would you have to, let's say, aspiring inventors or young inventors?
Yeah, I guess I would say, oh boy, what would I say to an aspiring inventor? I mean, I think it's a little difficult for me to disaggregate, again, kind of the things that I've liked doing and the things that have been worth me doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like I came to make stuff without a formal education in it, right? Like I studied linguistics in college.
Okay.
I mostly dissected sentence structures. And I like knew how to do a lot of stuff. Like I was a pretty handy person, but I'm not a mechanical engineer, and I'm definitely not an electrical engineer. And so the opportunities that were available to me, like I'm an incredibly privileged person, but I was not going to get a job at Apple,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if I wanted to work in consumer electronics, I was going to have to make something myself. And that was like the best way to like level up my skills was to do what in a lot of senses was kind of a dumb thing, which is like put a very niche consumer product out into the world and then commit myself to making 2,500 of them, right? I think that okay, what advice do I have? I think that something I take very seriously is my say-do ratio. Like I want to do what I say I was going to do. I'm very proud. Like we did a ton of things wrong in public radio. We continue to do a ton of things wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that we did do right was we closed our Kickstarter on time, right? Like we shipped those rewards on time. And
which is an anomaly in at least the 3D printing Kickstarter.
right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like, I don't know. I think that maintaining that personal integrity is very important to me.
Yeah.
Um, and ultimately, like, I just don't think you're going to get very far without like really pulling out of all the stops to do the things that you yourself committed to, right? It's like
Yeah.
no one's like twisting your arm to some aggressive shipping schedule. Like, just
Right.
make a shipping schedule that you know you're going to meet. Um, yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
Yeah, I love that kind of accountability, and I think there is the piece that I resonate is just that. Um, I think it's, I mean, this is kind of why I love inventing, why I love chemistry, why I love, physical stuff, but that feeling of I had this idea, I like I manifested it, and like now it's there, is really powerful. And I think it's even more powerful when you reach out to people and say, hey, I'm on this mission, here's what it's going to take me to do it, let's do it, and I'm gonna deliver. And I think there's something that is, um I don't know, it's an experience that I I would wish everyone could have, and build a lot of self-confidence in being in, uh it's a form of power, or a form of like, I don't know, self actualization or realization.
yeah,
And I love that.
yeah, totally.
So what, I guess along these lines, what is something that you would say is like commonly sort of misunderstood about, I guess it could be either be the invention piece or the manufacturing piece, but like what's the common like pitfall where the newbie goes into it and then realizes, oh man.
Uh, well, one thing I got really fond of saying a couple of years ago was that like manufacturing is just people doing things over and over again in a repeatable way. Like, it's like
I love
it
that.
really isn't that complicated, right? And I think that I have interpreted and internalized that in a couple of ways. Um, some wise, some not quite so wise. I think the wise thing that I've done is like I've personally shipped thousands of those radios,
Yeah.
right? And I think that um, I mean, like, it would have been really dumb for us to have handed that off to a contract manufacturer before we had shipped thousands of them. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that this is something that people go into projects because nowadays we know that Apple exists, we know that Foxconn exists, we know that like things are made in China and shipped on boats to the United States.
Right.
People who are making, like, I mean, I guess we're lucky because we made a product that was so specific and weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was never any pretension that the public radio was going to sell, you know, 10 million units, right?
Right.
Like,
You
that
weren't
just
gonna
wasn't.
raise a Series A for
No, exactly. And therefore, like, we never had to think about like what an investor would think if
yeah.
we did manufacturing in the US, right? Like, it's like we came to it and it's like, well, we have this weird product. Some people are going to buy them, and like, we've shipped uh 10 or 12,000 of these things. It's, we shipped like a fair number of these things now, um compared to how weird it is. But like, we always kind of came into it thinking like, oh, we're going to make these, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, as it happens, we have worked with contract manufacturers, and had them do many thousands of units for us without us touching a single one of them. But we got to that point after having done a lot of it ourselves,
Mhm.
and there's you just can't do something 1,000 times without developing a strong sense of empathy for the person who's going to you're going to then hand it off to, and
Yeah.
and I think that people make for pretty bad manufacturing engineers when they're not very well versed in doing it themselves. I think my takeaway.
Okay. I like
Yeah.
that. So the distill, I mean, you don't necessarily need to do 20,000 by yourself, but
Right.
you have,
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
that as the, you need to at least in your bones, so to speak, understand
Right.
the challenges and the problems. And I think the piece I can really resonate with there is I definitely kind of consider myself to be like a kinesthetic learner. Like there's
Hmm.
just certain things like I can't understand, or I can't um it's not that I can't think about them, but I think very differently. I learn very differently when I'm,
Right.
fiddling with the thing, when I'm touching it, when I'm, it's my arm that hurts because this thing's too far away, or,
Right.
I'm hearing all the beeping noises of the machines that are going off. I think, to your point, it's ultimately about empathy, and obviously for it to be scalable, you have to, like in your words of manufacturing is just people doing things over and over again repeatedly. You have to be able to teach it. You have to be able to uh, have it be scalable. But if you haven't done it, how can you do that?
Yeah. If you haven't repeated it, how do you know it's repeatable? Right.
There
It's
you go. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I love that. I love that. Awesome. So hey, I have a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. And I really appreciate your time, and want to be respectful of it and let you get back to your busy world. But um, I guess one question that I have uh, is who is your favorite inventor of all time?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Who's my favorite inventor of all time?
You can name a couple if you don't want to pick one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe. Uh, I don't know if I have an answer to that question. I think
That's okay.
that.
What about invention?
Yeah, that was kind of where I was thinking, right? I mean, um, like I I do really like the idea that um, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about what invention even is. Um, you know, Henry Ford didn't invent the car, right? He
Yeah,
invented a process to make cars,
right.
right? He invented a business model and a process.
Yeah,
Similarly, the modern car is arguably, I guess, invented by Taiichi Ono, right? It's lean manufacturing that is
yeah,
the really really powerful thing about the modern car industry, right?
yeah.
Um, and I think that I think yeah, I'm not sure if I would stand by that's my favorite invention of all time, but I
Hmm.
would say that it's really important to think about where the value is, right?
Right.
And now as it happens, I think that cars in many cases have very negative value, right? And to my point earlier, actually, probably my favorite invention is the bicycle, right?
Okay.
It's a much much better thing for the world than a car is,
Yeah.
by a lot. Um, but the modern automobile industry is an incredibly powerful invention, um, and I think that I might argue that the automobile industry is in many ways more net positive for humanity than the automobile is, right?
in terms of the process and the
Yeah, and in terms of just like the knowledge that comes from it and the experience. So there was actually talking about ventilators earlier, and right, the GM project to scale up Ventec, was it?
Ventec called GM.
And those stories were I mean, look, I love the story of some guy trying to recreate the army ventilator that's all just pneumatic or whatever it was. But like, honestly, GM scaling up Ventec's design is probably more powerful, right? And that's the automobile industry doing something. I have a lot of issues with the automobile industry, kind of in the political realm, maybe, but just from a process knowledge and excellence
process
standpoint,
excellence.
Yeah, really, really powerful.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, last question that's connected to favorite inventors is just who else should we invite on the show? Who are like people doing cool things that you want to shout out to before we take off?
That's a good question. Well, I know that you have Danielle coming up, which is a good one.
Awesome.
I'm a big fan of Star Simpson, who is now working on drones, I believe, but is a brilliant engineer and just a very funny person.
Okay.
Who else? Yeah, let me think.
It's okay. I don't mean to put you under the gun, but
yeah.
You gave me two really good ones, Danielle Applestone
Yeah.
and Star Simpson. So
Star is awesome. Yeah.
Okay.
She's badass. Yeah.
Cool. That's really fantastic. Great. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and Spencer, is really an honor to be with you, and I really appreciate it takes courage to go first, and with InventFM being in this kind of primordial state, I am really appreciative of you being willing to go first and help us figure out what we're even doing here. And
for sure, my
I can
pleasure.
learn a lot from you in the future. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And I think with that, we'll wrap up our live webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Raymond.